The crimson dawn of February 22, 1847, painted the rugged mountains of northern Mexico in hues of blood and fire, a prophetic omen for what would become one of the most decisive battles in American military history. General Zachary Taylor stood atop a rocky outcropping near the hacienda of Buena Vista, his weathered hands gripping a brass telescope as he surveyed the approaching Mexican army. 20,000 seasoned troops under General Antonio López de Santa Anna stretched across the valley like a dark tide, their colorful uniforms and gleaming bayonets creating a spectacle that would have intimidated lesser men. Taylor's force numbered barely 5,000 souls, mostly volunteers from Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, and Arkansas, with a sprinkling of regular Army units. These were not the polished soldiers of European armies, but farmers, merchants, and frontiersmen who had answered their nation's call. Many had never seen combat, their faces pale beneath wide-brimmed hats as they watched the Mexican columns advance with mechanical precision. The odds seemed insurmountable. Yet something in Taylor's demeanor, his calm confidence, his refusal to retreat despite orders from Washington, inspired a determination that would soon reshape the course of history. The strategic importance of this remote battlefield could not be overstated. Santa Anna, the self-proclaimed Napoleon of the West, had marched his army across 400 miles of brutal desert terrain to strike at what he believed was Taylor's vulnerable position. Intelligence reports had convinced the Mexican commander that the Americans were demoralized and ready to flee. He expected a quick victory that would restore Mexican prestige and potentially force the United States to negotiate a favorable peace. As referenced in Charles Winslow Eliot's comprehensive military analysis, Winfield Scott, The Soldier and the Man, the Mexican leadership severely underestimated both American resolve and tactical adaptability in frontier warfare conditions. The terrain itself told a story of geological violence that mirrored the human drama about to unfold. Steep ravines carved by centuries of flash floods created natural defensive positions, while scattered patches of chaparral and organ pipe cacti provided cover for sharpshooters. The hacienda of Buena Vista, a modest structure of adobe and timber, sat like a lonely sentinel overlooking the narrow valley that would soon echo with the thunder of artillery and the cries of dying men. To the east, the imposing Sierra Madre Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. Colonel Jefferson Davis, commanding the 1st Mississippi Rifles, moved among his men with quiet authority, checking equipment and offering words of encouragement. His volunteers, distinctive in their red shirts and white felt hats, represented the democratic spirit of American military service. Citizen soldiers who had left their plows and shops to serve their country. Nearby, Captain Braxton Bragg's battery of flying artillery gleamed in the morning sun, the bronze cannon barrels reflecting the determination in their crew's eyes. As Santa Anna's advance guard began probing American positions, Taylor made a decision that would echo through military academies for generations to come. Rather than retreat to more defensible positions as his subordinates urged, he would stand and fight on ground of his choosing, trusting in American marksmanship, artillery superiority, and the raw courage of his volunteers to overcome overwhelming numerical disadvantage. The first shots rang out at precisely 8 o'clock on the morning of February 23rd. As Mexican skirmishers advanced through the mesquite and prickly pear toward American positions, the sound echoed off the canyon, walls like thunder, sending startled birds wheeling into the crisp morning air. What began as scattered rifle fire quickly escalated into a symphony of destruction that would continue unabated for the next 10 hours. General Santa Anna had divided his massive force into multiple columns, intending to envelop Taylor's smaller army and crush it through sheer weight of numbers. His plan was tactically sound: fix the Americans in place with frontal attacks, while sending flanking forces around their vulnerable left wing. The Mexican 2nd Light Infantry, veterans of numerous campaigns, moved with professional competence across the broken ground, their officers mounted on prancing horses, sabers glinting in the sunlight. But Taylor had anticipated this maneuver. He positioned his most reliable units, the 3rd Indiana Volunteers and elements of the 4th Artillery, serving as infantry in strong defensive positions among the ravines and rocky outcroppings. These men, many of whom had learned their marksmanship hunting deer and bear in the forests of their home states, possessed an accuracy with their rifles that Mexican commanders had not encountered in previous engagements. Each shot was carefully aimed, each bullet finding its mark with deadly precision. The battle's early phase resembled a deadly game of chess played with human pieces. Mexican cavalry, their lances decorated with colorful pennants, swept around the American right flank only to encounter withering fire from Captain Thomas Sherman's battery. The thunder of 6-pound cannon mixed with the crack of rifles created a cacophony that could be heard 20 miles away in the town of Saltillo. Smoke began to obscure the battlefield, creating ghostly figures that appeared and disappeared in the gray haze. Colonel Humphrey Marshall's Kentucky cavalry found themselves in the thick of the action as Mexican lancers attempted to break through American lines. These frontiersmen, more comfortable with hunting rifles than sabers, dismounted and fought on foot, using their superior marksmanship to deadly effect. The sight of colorfully uniformed Mexican soldiers falling from their horses created a grim satisfaction among the volunteers, who had been told by their officers that they were fighting not just for military victory but for the honor of their young republic. As morning progressed into afternoon, the intensity of combat reached fever pitch. Major Samuel Ringgold's flying artillery, the pride of the American Army, wheeled across the battlefield with almost theatrical precision, unlimbering their guns to deliver devastating canister shots before limbering up again to seek new targets. This mobile warfare, still revolutionary in an age when artillery was typically considered a static defensive weapon, proved devastatingly effective against Mexican infantry formations. Trained in Napoleonic tactics, the human cost began to mount. On both sides, Dr. John Porter, the Army's chief surgeon, established a field hospital in a stone building near the hacienda, where the screams of wounded men mixed with the distant sound of battle. American casualties, while lighter than their opponents, included some of the Army's most promising young officers. The democratic nature of death in battle respected neither rank nor social position, cutting down private and colonel with equal indifference. By noon, Santa Anna realized that his initial assumptions about American fighting capability had been tragically incorrect. These were not the demoralized troops his spies had described, but disciplined soldiers fighting with the fervor of men defending their homeland's honor. Thousands of miles from home, the afternoon sun blazed mercilessly down upon the blood-soaked valley as the battle reached its most critical juncture. Santa Anna, his ornate uniform now dusty, and his face grim with the realization that victory would not come easily, ordered a massive assault on the American left flank. 8,000 Mexican infantry, supported by cavalry and artillery, began their advance across the broken ground, their regimental bands playing martial airs that competed with the roar of cannon fire. General John Wool, Taylor's second-in-command, watched the approaching tide of blue and red uniforms through his field glasses, his jaw set in determination. The son of a tavern keeper from New York, Wool had risen through the ranks based on merit rather than social connections, embodying the democratic ideals that these volunteer soldiers were fighting to preserve. He had positioned his reserves, the 2nd Kentucky Regiment and elements of the 3rd Indiana, in a series of mutually supporting positions that would allow them to concentrate their fire on any breakthrough attempt. The Mexican assault struck the American line with the force of a hurricane. Columns of infantry, their bayonets fixed and their officers shouting orders in Spanish, surged forward through the thorny undergrowth. The 1st Illinois Regiment, composed mainly of farmers and small-town merchants who had never imagined they would fight in such an exotic battlefield, stood their ground with remarkable steadiness. Their colonel, John Hardin, moved along the firing line on foot, his voice carrying clearly above the din. "Steady, boys, remember, you're fighting for old Hickory's country." Captain Braxton Bragg's artillery battery found itself the focal point of the Mexican attack. As enemy infantry closed to within 50 yards of his guns, Bragg made a decision that would become legendary in American military folklore. Rather than retreat, he ordered his cannoneers to load with double charges of canister, essentially turning each cannon into a gigantic shotgun. The devastating effect of these point-blank discharges created gaps in the Mexican ranks that could be measured in dozens of fallen bodies. The battle's tide turned dramatically when Colonel Jefferson Davis led his Mississippi Rifles in a flanking maneuver that caught the Mexican 2nd Light Infantry in a deadly crossfire. Davis, who would later become President of the Confederate States, demonstrated tactical brilliance that day, positioning his red-shirted volunteers in a V-shaped formation that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to enemy return fire. According to military historian Edward Mansfield's detailed account in the Mexican War, A History of Its Origin, this tactical innovation became a subject of study in military academies across Europe and America. The psychological impact of seeing their elite units broken and fleeing began to tell on Mexican morale. These were troops who had conquered Texas at the Alamo, who had marched triumphantly through the halls of their nation's enemies. Now they found themselves facing an enemy who refused to be intimidated, who seemed to grow stronger as the battle progressed. American volunteers, many fighting their first major engagement, displayed a ferocity that surprised even their own officers. As the afternoon wore on, individual acts of heroism began to multiply across the battlefield. Sergeant Patrick Dunn, of the 3rd Artillery, his left arm shattered by a Mexican musket ball, continued to serve his gun with his right hand until he collapsed from blood loss. Private Samuel Morrison of the Kentucky Cavalry single-handedly captured a Mexican regimental standard, fighting off 3 enemy soldiers with nothing but his rifle used as a club. The Mexican army, despite its numerical superiority, began to show signs of exhaustion and demoralization. Santa Anna's carefully planned assault had devolved into a series of uncoordinated attacks that American defenders repulsed with increasing confidence. The sight of their comrades falling in ever greater numbers, combined with the seemingly inexhaustible determination of their opponents, began to erode the fighting spirit of even veteran Mexican units. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, both commanders realized that the battle's outcome would likely be decided by the actions of the next few hours. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the battlefield as General Santa Anna prepared what he intended to be his final, decisive assault. Gathering his remaining reserves, the elite Tampico Battalion and elements of his personal guard, the Mexican commander issued orders for an all-out attack on the American center. This would be a battle of attrition in its purest form, where superior numbers would eventually overwhelm stubborn resistance through sheer bloody persistence. Major William Bliss, serving as Taylor's chief of staff, rode frantically between American positions, carrying orders and coordinating the defense. The young officer, who had graduated near the top of his West Point class, found himself applying classroom theories of warfare to a chaotic reality where textbook solutions often proved inadequate. His horse, a bay mare named Liberty, had been wounded twice, but continued to carry her rider with unflagging determination that seemed to embody the American spirit. The assault began with a thunderous artillery barrage that shook the earth and filled the air with choking smoke and dust. Mexican 12-pounders, positioned on elevated ground nearly a mile away, hurled solid shot and explosive shells into American lines with methodical precision. The sound was indescribable, a continuous roar punctuated by the screams of wounded men and horses, the crash of splintering wood, and the peculiar whining sound of ricocheting cannonballs. Captain John Reynolds of the 3rd Artillery found his battery under concentrated fire from multiple Mexican guns. Rather than withdraw to safer positions, Reynolds ordered his crews to engage in counter-battery fire, creating an artillery duel that would be remembered as one of the most intense of the Mexican War. Gun crews, their faces blackened with powder, smoke, and their uniforms soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air, served their pieces with mechanical precision born of endless drill and desperate necessity. The Mexican infantry attack, when it came, struck with the force of an avalanche. Thousands of soldiers, their uniforms bright despite the dust and smoke, advanced in column formation across the broken ground. Their bands played the Degelo, the same tune that had accompanied the assault on the Alamo, but this time the psychological warfare backfired. American volunteers, many of whom had grown up hearing stories of that famous defeat, responded with increased determination rather than fear. Colonel William McKee's 2nd Kentucky Regiment found itself at the epicenter of the assault. These men, recruited from the bluegrass country around Lexington and Louisville, possessed a natural marksmanship that made every shot count. McKee himself, a veteran of the War of 1812, moved among his men with calm authority, his presence steadying nerves and stiffening resolve. "Remember, boys," he called out during a brief lull in the firing, "we're writing history today with powder and ball." The human drama playing out across the battlefield transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. Mexican soldiers, fighting for what they believed was their homeland's honor, displayed courage equal to their American opponents. Captain Jose Maria Montoya of the Guadalajara Battalion, his uniform torn and his sword broken, continued to rally his men even after suffering 3 wounds. Such individual heroism on both sides elevated the battle from mere military conflict to epic struggle between 2 competing visions of North American destiny. Dr. Richard Satterfield, the regimental surgeon attached to the Arkansas Cavalry, worked tirelessly in his makeshift field hospital, treating wounded from both armies without discrimination. According to contemporary accounts preserved in the National Archives, Satterfield's humanitarian efforts during the battle exemplified the professional medical ethics that transcended national loyalties even in the heat of combat. As darkness began to fall, the battle's character changed dramatically. What had been a conventional engagement fought in daylight with clear fields of fire became a confused night action where friend and foe were distinguished more by voice and uniform details than by clear visual identification. The muzzle flashes of rifles and pistols created a deadly fireworks display that illuminated faces frozen in expressions of determination, fear, and exhaustion. The tide of battle hung in perfect balance as both armies prepared for what might be the final phase of this epic confrontation. Darkness fell over the battlefield like a heavy curtain, bringing neither rest nor respite to the exhausted combatants. The temperature dropped rapidly in the high desert air, and wounded men from both armies cried out for water and medical attention. The eerie combination of moaning wind through the cacti and the distant sound of men dying created an atmosphere that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. General Taylor, his uniform rumpled and his face showing the strain of 16 hours of continuous combat, established his headquarters in a small stone building near the hacienda. By candlelight, he studied dispatch reports from his subordinate commanders, trying to assess the true state of his battered force. The news was mixed. His men had fought with extraordinary courage and effectiveness, but ammunition was running dangerously low, and casualty reports painted a grim picture of the day's cost. Santa Anna, meanwhile, faced his own crisis of command. His army, though still numerically superior, had suffered devastating losses throughout the day. More critically, the morale of his troops had been shaken by their inability to break the American defense despite overwhelming advantages in men and artillery. Mexican officers reported increasing numbers of desertions as soldiers simply melted away into the darkness, seeking safety in the surrounding mountains. The night brought individual stories of heroism and tragedy that would be rattled around campfires. For generations, Sergeant Michael O'Brien of the 2nd Indiana, his leg shattered by grape shot, crawled nearly 200 yards through thorny undergrowth to carry ammunition to his isolated squad. Private David Martinez of the Arkansas Mounted Rifles, though badly wounded himself, spent the night moving between fallen comrades, offering water from his canteen and words of encouragement. Captain Electus Backus, commanding a company of the 1st Artillery serving as infantry, organized a series of night patrols to prevent Mexican infiltration of American lines. These small groups of soldiers, moving silently through the desert scrub with bayonets fixed, engaged in deadly games of hide-and-seek with enemy scouts. The psychological strain of this nocturnal warfare, where death could come without warning from any shadow, tested the mental fortitude of even the most experienced soldiers. The medical situation grew increasingly desperate as the night progressed. American surgeons, working by lantern light in conditions that would horrify modern medical practitioners, performed amputations and extracted bullets with instruments that were sterilized only by being heated over open flames. The screams of men undergoing surgery without adequate anesthesia mixed with the groans of those waiting their turn, creating a symphony of suffering that epitomized war's ultimate cost. Mexican forces, recognizing the opportunity presented by darkness, launched a series of probing attacks designed to test American resolve and identify weak points in their defensive perimeter. These night assaults, while not as massive as the daylight attacks, proved equally deadly due to the confusion and close-quarters combat they generated. Soldiers fought with bayonets, rifle butts, and sometimes bare hands in struggles that were decided by individual courage and physical strength, rather than tactical sophistication. Colonel Archibald Yell of the Arkansas Cavalry, a former governor of his state who had volunteered for military service at age 52, led several counterattacks against Mexican positions during the night. According to detailed military records examined by historian Justin Smith in his comprehensive work, The War with Mexico, Yell's aggressive tactics prevented Santa Anna from reorganizing his forces for another major assault. As dawn approached, on February 24th, both commanders faced crucial decisions that would determine not only the battle's outcome, but potentially the war's ultimate conclusion. Taylor's ammunition situation had become critical. His artillery batteries were down to fewer than 50 rounds per gun, and many infantry companies had less than 20 cartridges per man. Santa Anna's army, while still formidable in numbers, showed increasing signs of demoralization and unit cohesion breakdown. The stage was set for a climactic confrontation that would test the limits of human endurance and military leadership under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The pale light of dawn on February 24th revealed a battlefield transformed by night and violence into a landscape from Dante's imagination. Bodies of men and horses lay scattered across the desert floor, their uniforms providing splashes of color against the brown earth and gray-green vegetation. Vultures circled overhead in patient spirals, while coyotes watched from distant ridges. With predatory interest, General Zachary Taylor emerged from his headquarters building to survey the scene with eyes reddened by smoke and sleepless vigilance. His aide, Lieutenant George Meade, reported that American casualties numbered nearly 700 killed and wounded, a devastating loss for such a small force, yet remarkably light considering the intensity of the previous day's combat. More importantly, the Army's fighting spirit remained intact, with regimental commanders reporting their men ready to continue the battle. Santa Anna faced a more complex situation. His losses exceeded 3,000 casualties, including many irreplaceable veteran NCOs and company-grade officers. More critically, entire units had simply vanished during the night, their men deserting rather than face another day of slaughter against an enemy who refused to acknowledge defeat. The Mexican commander called a council of war with his senior officers, meeting in a captured American supply wagon to discuss their rapidly deteriorating position. The morning brought renewed artillery exchanges as both sides tested their opponents' remaining strength. Captain Thomas Sherman's battery, now reduced to 3 serviceable guns, engaged Mexican pieces across the valley in a deadly mathematical exercise, where each shot could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The American gunners, their movements now economical and precise from hard experience, made every round count with devastating effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Clay Jr., son of the famous Kentucky senator, led his squadron of Kentucky cavalry in a reconnaissance mission that provided crucial intelligence about Mexican dispositions. The younger Clay, seeking to honor his family name through military service, had volunteered despite his father's political opposition to the war. His report revealed that Santa Anna was withdrawing his artillery and preparing what appeared to be either a final assault or a general retreat. The decisive moment came at precisely 9 o'clock, when Mexican bugles sounded the advance for what would be Santa Anna's last major attack. 3,000 infantry, supported by cavalry and the remnants of the artillery, moved across the broken ground in a formation that stretched nearly 2 miles, their battle flags, many torn by shot and shell, still flew defiantly in the morning breeze as these soldiers advanced toward what they knew might be their deaths. Colonel Jefferson Davis, his Mississippi Rifles now reduced to fewer than 200 effective men, positioned his command in the path of the main Mexican assault. These volunteers, their red shirts now faded and torn, their white hats blackened with powder smoke, represented the democratic ideal of citizen soldiers defending their nation's honor. Davis himself, despite a severe foot wound suffered the previous day, remained mounted and visible to inspire his men through personal example. The collision between Mexican assault columns and American defensive lines created a vortex of violence that surpassed even the previous day's carnage. Hand-to-hand combat erupted across multiple points as Mexican soldiers, driven by desperate courage, closed a bayonet range with American defenders. The sound was indescribable, the clash of steel on steel, the grunts of men locked in mortal combat, the screams of the wounded, and the shouted orders of officers trying to maintain control over chaos. Captain Braxton Bragg's battery found itself overrun by Mexican infantry, leading to a desperate fight around the guns themselves. American artillerymen fought with rammers, handspikes, and pistols to prevent capture of their pieces, while Mexican soldiers showed equal determination to seize these symbols of battlefield victory. The struggle for each cannon became a miniature epic, with individual acts of heroism occurring almost faster than observers could record. The battle's climax came when Mexican cavalry, led by General Anastasio Torrejon himself, broke through American lines and threatened Taylor's headquarters. For several terrifying minutes, it appeared that the American commander might be captured or killed, which would have meant certain defeat for his army. However, the rapid response of Major Samuel Churchill, leading a company of regular infantry, restored the line and drove back the Mexican horsemen in fierce combat that left both leaders wounded. As the sun climbed higher, the intensity of combat gradually decreased as both armies reached the limits of human endurance and material resources. By noon on February 24th, the battlefield had fallen into an eerie silence broken only by the moans of wounded men and the distant sound of Mexican bugles sounding retreat. General Santa Anna, his elaborate uniform now dusty and stained, made the most difficult decision of his military career. Despite still commanding superior numbers, he ordered a general withdrawal toward San Luis Potosi, acknowledging that his army's fighting effectiveness had been shattered. Against the stubborn resistance of Taylor's volunteers, the sight of the Mexican army in retreat created scenes of jubilation among American survivors that would be remembered for generations. Soldiers who had expected to die fighting hopeless odds found themselves victorious against an enemy that had seemed invincible. Colonel William Bissell of the 2nd Illinois, his regiment reduced to fewer than 300 men, led his survivors in 3 cheers for General Taylor, their voices hoarse from shouting orders and breathing smoke, but their spirits soaring with the realization of what they had accomplished. General Taylor, ever mindful of his responsibility to his men, immediately ordered pursuit operations to ensure that Santa Anna's withdrawal became permanent rather than temporary. Major Samuel Ringgold's surviving artillery pieces, though reduced to half their original number, limbered up to follow the retreating columns and prevent any attempt at reorganization. The pursuit would continue for 3 days, with American cavalry harassing Mexican rear guards and ensuring that the retreat did not become a mere tactical repositioning. The human cost of victory became fully apparent as burial details began their grim work. American losses totaled 734 killed, wounded, and missing nearly 15% of Taylor's original force. Among the dead lay some of the Army's most promising young officers, including Lieutenant Colonel Henry Clay Jr., whose death would send shock waves through Kentucky politics and demonstrate that war's toll respected neither family name nor social position. Mexican casualties proved even more devastating, with contemporary estimates placing their losses at over 3,000 men. More significantly, Santa Anna's army had suffered a psychological blow from which it would never fully recover. The myth of Mexican military superiority over American forces had been shattered permanently, fundamentally altering the strategic balance of the war. The battle's immediate aftermath saw remarkable scenes of humanity amid the carnage. American medical personnel, working alongside captured Mexican surgeons, treated wounded from both armies without discrimination. Dr. John Porter, the chief army surgeon, established field hospitals in every available building, turning the hacienda of Buena Vista into a multinational medical facility, where enemies became patients deserving equal care and compassion. News of the victory reached Washington 3 weeks later, transforming General Taylor from a competent professional soldier into a national hero. President James Polk, despite his political differences with the Whig general, issued a proclamation praising the Army's conduct and declaring a day of national thanksgiving. The battle's fame spread internationally, with European military observers studying Taylor's tactical innovations and marveling at the fighting quality of American volunteer soldiers. The strategic consequences of Buena Vista extended far beyond the immediate military situation. Santa Anna's defeat effectively ended Mexican hopes of reconquering territory lost in the early phases of the war, forcing Mexico City to concentrate its remaining resources on defending the capital against Winfield Scott's advance from Veracruz. The battle also demonstrated American military capabilities to potential European interventionists, effectively deterring foreign involvement in the conflict. For the survivors, Buena Vista became a defining experience that shaped their understanding of American identity and capability. Many would go on to serve in the Civil War, carrying with them tactical lessons and leadership experience gained in the mountains of northern Mexico. Jefferson Davis's political career was launched by his battlefield performance, while Zachary Taylor's military reputation helped propel him to the presidency. In 1840-8, the Battle of Buena Vista stands as testimony to the power of citizen soldiers fighting for principles they believed in, proving that democratic armies could match and exceed the performance of professional military establishments. In the harsh landscape of northern Mexico, American volunteers had written a chapter of military history that would inspire their countrymen for generations to come, demonstrating that courage, determination, and superior leadership could triumph over overwhelming odds. The victory at Buena Vista represented more than tactical success. It embodied the young American republic's coming of age as a military power, capable of projecting its strength across continental distances and prevailing against experienced enemies. The battle's legacy would resonate through American military doctrine and national consciousness, proving that free men fighting for their country's honor possessed advantages that could not be measured in mere numbers or conventional military wisdom.